And hello there, people of the world, patient travelers, patient adventurers, cooler designers, cooler manufacturers. As always, welcome to my channel, Sir Koolzalot. You're cool, I'm cool, we're all super cool. So today I am reviewing the INSUCOOLER EverCool. Specifically, I recently purchased the Lite model kit. You can get different sizes that come with and without batteries and other things, and so I got the Lite kit and figured I would take a look and see how it performs. Just a heads up, I have reviewed a much earlier edition of this product. I think it was maybe an original version 1 about a year or two ago. So it does like they've actually done a fairly substantial amount of work on this this model, and so I'm definitely very excited here to take a look and see how it performs. So let's jump on in. So as always, I have disclaimers. My travel journey is my own. I'm on a quest to find the best travel coolers that are out there. All of my data is my own. I collected it with temperature probes that have been calibrated, and I am sharing my learnings with the community. So let's take a closer look at the product at hand. So here it is. Here's the star of the show. Very well presented. The kit that it comes with is very elegant. It has the flask, the main USB cooler. It has a secondary lid that also has a temperature reading device on it for the biogel. Very nice, very elegant. It has a plug, an adapter. It has a little carrier bag that has a beautiful a pharmacy cross on it, which I've never seen before. I have to say this bag is probably one of the most elegant included bags that I have seen with a travel cooler. So kudos for the effort there. But let's take a closer look at it and see if it's a good product. So as always, sometimes it can be a little bit cryptic to figure out who the company is that's manufacturing the different products, but lo and behold, the brand INSUCOOLER is in fact owned by the manufacturer that's also listed on the product, which is Huizhou Tufei Technology Co. So kudos to them for being the manufacturer and also the reseller here with their own brand. So I definitely like that. It sometimes gets a little bit confusing to actually really understand who's who, what's real, what's not, what's relabeled, what's been rebranded with a logo, and so on and so forth. So I like what I'm seeing here. So looking at the product a little bit more carefully, some of their advertised material. So it looks like it has pretty reasonable storage capacity, similar to some of the other USB coolers that are out there. The included biogel is pretty standard fare. We've seen this product type a few times across different models, and then of course now here we've also got this interesting carrier bag with a mesh structure at the top there that's I assume to allow the USB lid to keep cool. So let's keep on going. This is just looking again at some of the advertised material, so showcasing what it can hold, and then also some of the different temperature profiles that it's claiming. And then actually here you can now see the different kits. The kit that I got didn't have this included battery setup and so on. So, but depending on which model you get, you may be able to get different types of accessories. As you know, I have quite a collection of batteries, so I figured I don't really need to add another one to my inventory at this point. I will just roll with what I have. This was on the e-commerce sites, so I just copied this straight up as is. It's the about this item information. So one thing I noticed quite quickly, this was on Amazon, by the way, was I hope these are typos. I'm sure they are, but it says a smart 3,668 Fahrenheit temperature control. I'm going to say that that might be missing a little dash, so, 36 to 68 Fahrenheit. And then a little further on, it says it has a capacity for 37 pens, but I think what they meant to say there was 3 to 7. And then further down, it actually advertises that the product can fit easily into a travel case and that fits into luggage and backpacks. Forward warning here, do not put a USB lid that's live and cooling your meds inside a backpack. It will warm up very, very quickly because it won't be able to cool. So I'm assuming here what they were inferring to is when it's in the biogel mode. So, but anyway, just a little note here to, I guess, pay attention to those details on those e-commerce sites because they can substantially shift the meaning of what intends to be said. But anyway, I think I understand. Let's keep on going. So now for maybe a tour of the product. So this is a top view. So here's the box. It opens up, and then of course you're first presented with the carrier bag. It's pretty compacted, so we'll have to kind of open that up. But here you can get kind of a first glimpse at it. It has this really nice aluminium kind of inner liner. It's got a nice pocket. It's made of a very nice fabric. And then there's the included strap. So definitely give that high points for elegance and aesthetics. So, but we'll test that out a little bit more later to see if it's practical. A cleaning brush. I have not seen that before, but actually that's kind of cool. I always wondered about the best way to kind of poke down the aluminium tube and kind of give it a polish once in a while. So now I have an instrument for that. The INSUCOOLER does actually, the aluminium tube does actually unscrew from the lid, so you can actually fully remove it. But just a word of caution that you'll wanna make sure that when you put it back, it's really snug and tight, because that's essentially like a computer processor. It's a heat sink, right? That's pulling the heat from the chamber, and so you want that those contact points to the Peltier plate or to the USB lid to be nice and tight, so that you get maximum thermal transfer. So if that sort of makes sense, so wise tip on there. Really make sure that lid is nice and tight if it happens to be one that unscrews. Some of the products, the lid you can unscrew. They've fixed it to the lid, but some of them you can actually unscrew it. So there's that lid for the gel pack that also has a little temperature reader, and actually a little tether as well, which is kind of cool. So you can run that tether deeper into the flask to get a really good temperature read. In this video I didn't test the gel pack, but one heads up, for a future series of projects, I've actually behind the scenes I've been doing quite a bit of experimental work with gel packs, and in maybe a couple of months I'm going to be publishing some comprehensive protocols on how to set up coolers with gel packs for travel. So the total protocol of freezing the gel pack, bringing it out of the freezer, preparing it for packing, and then executing a trip with live meds, while protecting the meds from being frozen, and also not sacrificing the actual gel packs frozen state too much. So here you can see me unscrewing the aluminium tube there. You can see what I mean now, how it comes off. And then note how the cap for this aluminium tube is metallic. I've never seen that before. Most of the time they're sort of plastic rubber structures, but this is the first time I've seen a metallic cap that screws into position. So that's kind of cool and intriguing. Actually, I have to say, from a durability, wearability perspective, that is quite elegant. So definitely high points for elegance and craftsmanship here. It's definitely an upgrade from the previous unit, the generation 1 that I had a look at several months, maybe a year ago. So let's keep on going. Let's see how. Let me show you what else I got. All right, and so now we can maybe take a little bit of a closer look at how the product works. So you plug it in from the side. The cable has a right angle plug. So here you can kind of see the control panel. It's quite a large temperature display in the middle. So if you press reasonably quickly and release, it will cycle between Fahrenheit and centigrade. If you press and hold until it starts flashing, you can then essentially tap and change the setting of the temperature. So it scrolls up to down. So you can go as low as about the lowest is 2 degrees C. So let me sort of show you that a few times, and then as it's cooling, there's sort of this red halo light that circles around the temperature display, which you can kind of see coming on and off. So it kind of the halos on and off every so often. It kind of pulses, and so that's the basic setup. That little sticker there actually was there's a little plastic film that sits over it to protect it. I left it on just in case I wanted to kind of keep it nice. So the actual surface is much more elegant and cleaner than it actually looks here, because there's this sort of little plastic sheet that's sitting over it. But hopefully this gives you a kind of an idea of essentially how this works. So really nothing too complex. And then you've got little vent grills on the top of the lid and vent grills on the side. The vent grills, I noticed, are a lot smaller than some of the other units. They're definitely more compact, and so I'm kind of interested to see how that performs. I switched off the light so you could kind of see what that looks like in the dark here. Gives you an idea of the nighttime thing. So depending on your nighttime needs around hotels or night flights and stuff like that, one obvious thing is this red flashing light may or may not be a nuisance or problematic, depending on how you view that. But I think you could probably just put a little circular tape around that ring if you wanted to sort of block it out based on needs. So I'm sure one can kind of do something like that. But it's actually a shame that one can't actually maybe switch it off if they wanted to. So something to think about. Let's keep on going. All right, so now here we're gonna take a look at the capacity of the product. So trying out a few different pens. Here you've got the big EpiPens there. So definitely you can fit at least 2 in there. They take up quite a bit of room, so I don't think you can get more than 2 in there. And here we've got the infamous Z-bound with its large foot, the big base, the triangular base. So jiggling around with this, you have 1 pen in the up position and 2 in the down, and you can just about fit 3 in there from my point of view. If you do put 3 in there, you won't be able to close the lid. But as noted in some earlier demonstration videos, the lid structure really just doesn't matter. So I think I would travel comfortably in this setup without that little cap. I should call it a cap, really. And I would probably have a probe sitting at the base there instead. So I'd probably want that open anyway. So I think it's the advertisement is correct, then it can only hold 2 if you close the lid. But I'm going to say I think you can actually fit 3 Z-bound pens in there. Here we got some Wegovy looking pens, so you can kind of see those are much more compact. As a stack of 4, you could probably get about 6 or 7 in there, would be my guess. And then, of course, trying out some vials. Now, with vials that are glass, aluminium tubes may not be your best friends, so you're going to have to be really careful and thoughtful here about how you approach something like this. But this is a demonstration to show you how much space you have here. So I think you might want to be careful not to smash the glass when you're traveling and other things like that. So you may even have a little bag you use to put the vials in and so on and so forth. So but at least here you can get a feel for size. So it's not the aluminium tube is not geometrically perfect for vials. So a little pain point here is that you can't sort of tight stack let's call it a shelf of vials. So it takes a little bit of work to kind of shimmy all of the vials in, and then get one layer and then another and so on. So it's definitely a little bit fiddly. So you probably want to practice this before doing it with the real thing if you're also at some point trying to race against increasing temperatures. So you can kind of see I'm full now. I'm at the end. So did you count how many I got in there? Are you ready for the big reveal? Well, there we go. So it's 12 vials. So not too bad. It's quite a good size there. And so this is another auto-injector training, so I might as well show a couple of different products. We've got the Emerald here. You can see you could probably fit quite a few of those in there, depending on your dose and how many you need to carry. So hopefully that gives you a nice idea of the USB lid capacity. And then, of course, mirroring that, there's the gel setup. So the gel pack is quite sizable, and you will lose most, about half of the container, which you can kind of see here. So depending on what you're transporting, this may or may not be a challenge. Another thing to consider here is being careful of not freezing your product. So here I'm just giving you a quick peek at how much space there is, but you may also need to put a little bit of a sort of a bubble wrap or other kind of a thermal barrier layer to not freeze your meds. But as you can see, you don't have a lot of real estate. So I think you can basically get 4 Wegovy type pens in, Z-bound pens, no way you can get more than 2. I fiddle with it. You can see this here. The problem is in this setup with the little pen, the base of the pen's sitting beyond the gel pack, you actually can't close the lid because you're now interfering with the thickness of the USB lid. So you can basically fit 2 of those. And then vial capacity isn't that great either. It takes a little bit of work to stack them as well. And then, of course, putting vials directly against a frozen ice pack may not be a good idea either. So, but anyway, this is for visualization of how much volume you have to work with here. So you can kind of see what I did there. So did you manage to count how many I got in there? It's basically three rows of 3. So you can get about 6 vials in there, as you can see. So basically about half of the amount you could have got with the USB lid. And then there's those EpiPens. You can just about fit 2 in there, so not too bad. All right, so let's keep on going. So now for the carrier bag. So let's have a look at this. So here you can see some of the photos of the carrier bag. So it was certainly compacted when it arrived. So I opened it up and started taking a closer look. So some things you can see. So nice pocket for batteries. This is one of the smaller 25,000 milliamp in-use. So nice amount of room there. There's a little holder there, I guess, for like headphones or other things like that. Not sure how practical that is, but anyway, there it is. And then most interestingly, there's this sort of mesh structure here, which is obviously engineered to allow the vents to flow while it's still in the cooler bag. So I think this is going to be maybe the area of interest to look at a little bit more carefully with this design and setup to see whether this is a good setup or whether it's somehow interfering with the quality of the cooler. All right, so let's keep on going. So kind of here zooming in a little bit more on that carrier bag. So here you can kind of see a close-up of the strap. I'm going to say it's a shame this isn't metallic. These plastic clips do tend to break pretty easily, but the strap's very replaceable, I guess, so maybe that's something, maybe that's not. The zip for the pocket, it's a shame there isn't 2 zips. There's only 1, so when you zip it closed, the zip goes all the way around to the side. So this means that cables will have to pass through this area here. If there was 2 zips, you would be able to kind of join the zips towards the middle at the top, and then this would be a great spot to be able to let cables out. So just something to think about. I love the aluminium inner liner. Very elegant, very nice. Does it help with the cooling or not? It probably helps a little bit. It's always nice to keep the thermoflask as cool as possible to retain the cold, so to speak. So definitely like the aluminium inner liner. And here you can kind of see a close-up of the mesh. So a couple of things to think about. The mesh isn't continuous all the way around. There's a quadrant of the mesh here that's solid. So this may or may not run interference with the vents. You basically block out an entire vent panel by having this piece here. So that's going to certainly reduce the cooling efficiency. And the purpose of this feature is it's got the little tightening string. The other thing is cable management. So there isn't really an elegant way to run the cable out of the bag when the mesh is in position and stuff. So you sort of have to, here's the cable port plugged in. The cable runs down here, but you have to basically loop it out and send it over the top. So kind of a shame there isn't maybe like a little hole somewhere to make that a little bit cleaner. But anyway, there's some little subtle design things to sort of think about there. All right, so let's keep on going. So kind of now zooming in a little bit more. So here's that sort of pharmacy hospital cross. Really elegant. I have to say, I really appreciate the work here, the craftsmanship, if you want to call it that. This has to be one of the most elegant looking cooler bags I have ever seen come with a travel cooler kit. Normally the bags that come with the travel coolers are so cheap and poorly manufactured that you really basically just have to buy another one that is nicer. So yeah, so this is certainly thumbs up in terms of effort here. Now you'll note that in this image here, I actually tucked the mesh in. And so there is the possibility that you don't have the mesh sitting over those grills. I will play around with this a little bit more in a little bit later on in this presentation. I have some notes on this. So, but just a heads up, you can very elegantly just tuck that mesh away into the bag so that it doesn't kind of interfere with the vents, and then of course you've got the little carrier strap and other things. So let's keep on going. So now some thermals. Haven't done the thermals for a little while in a video, but always worth having a look at now and then. So overall, the cooler itself, very nice. The flask has a good structure. It looks like the vacuum is well formed. The different layers are well formed. I couldn't see any obvious defects and so on. But one thing you'll probably see here is just how glowing bright the plug is, if you can visualize what that structure is. Yes, in fact, this is the plug, the adapter that came with the kit. It got really hot. In this video, the thermal imager was clocking nearly 120 Fahrenheit with the plug, which I think is, and then when you touch it to the hand, it's really hot, to the point where I'm going to say either the plug that I had with the kit was maybe defective or not right, or somehow the plug was not the correct plug for the amount of sort of power that the unit needed to draw to kind of cool. So just a heads up on this, that's definitely a quality ding here, that the plug that came with my unit is, I'm going to call it very electrically suspicious. And there's that plug, looking at it closely, so you can see that the current, you can really see there's a problem with this plug. So the current that's being drawn through the plug into the adapter itself and then through into the cable is very hot. So this, the ampage, the wattage, or the voltage is something's exceeding the what is appropriate here, or what the cooler essentially needs. So let's say no more about that. I think this picture speaks 1,000 words. So let's keep on going. So now for the vents. Looking at the vents, nothing surprising here. You've got Obviously this is going to be the hotter area. You can kind of tell that the way the cooler works is it sucks air in from the top and then blows the hot air out of the side, and then this is reflective of the different thermal, the sort of the thermal gradient here. You can kind of see that obviously, and then when you look at the side here, you can kind of see that sort of grill, sort of vented grill. You can see the hot spots there where the air is essentially coming through. So yeah, nothing unusual about this, just sort of interesting to see how it works. But now let's have a look at the mesh. So if you recall, I mentioned earlier that this bag has a mesh structure. The carrier bag has a mesh structure that can sit over the vents. What's interesting about that is when you put the mesh over the vents, obviously the mesh itself gets quite hot. But here I've got two sets of thermal pictures. The top here is with the first one here is a picture of the cooler with the mesh on. This really big hotspot on one of the corners. And then actually the mesh panel has an area where air cannot flow, so it sort of blocks out the air, so that's interesting. So the mesh panel, although it has little vents around it, it actually has an area that blocks flow of air. So then what that means is the air will need to flow out into the remaining area, it doesn't have the full area now available to sort of cool. So that's sort of noteworthy. And then when you just after you quickly remove the mesh and you look at the cooler itself, the surface of the vents is much hotter than when it didn't have the mesh. So here, here's a picture here of what the vents look like just without a mesh under their normal operating conditions. You can almost very clearly see the individual vents in the, because they're a little bit hotter as the air's sort of flowing through versus the lid structure. But here in this middle picture, this was just after I moved the vent out. You can't even resolve the individual vent grids because the whole surface of the USB lid is much hotter. So I'm going to hypothesize that the mesh will have a negative effect on the cooling performance based on what I'm seeing here. And then I will actually show you some data later on that will confirm my observations. So something to think about if you are using this product. That's just to give you an idea of how it sounds. So its operating decibels is around 48. When you get right up to the cooler, it goes up to about 60. So it's about the same as if you've seen the Chi Tai Tai. It's on the slightly louder side. It's a little bit louder than the X1s, the X4s, and so on, but not by much, by maybe about 7 decibels. It has a distinctive sound, so hopefully you could hear that sound. It sounds like I'm going to go with a quiet hairdryer. So it has sort of this hissing, hussing hairdryer kind of sound, kind of thing. I don't know if that's the most elegant way to describe sounds with words, but anyway, you heard it with your own ears anyway, so the video speaks for itself. So let's keep on going. So this is just a still photo of the decibel meter So you can kind of see here what it was reading in different positions. So you can kind of see that sort of averaging about 48 decibels during running. Now, the other thing that I noticed was it had two levels of sound. It had a lower sound level when it was in the, let's call it the maintenance mode. And then it had a slightly higher sound level when it was in the cooling mode. Now, interestingly enough, this cooler never completely switched off. It just had a high and a low cooling intensity that it cycled back and forth on. Some coolers will cool for a little bit, then they will switch off. They will completely switch off, so you can't even hear them, and then they will turn back on. The INSUCOOLER actually essentially cycled from a low to a high cooling intensity. So it was really just on the whole time, but just kind of flux in between the two. So hopefully that makes sense in the way that I'm describing that. So note how here the voltage is at 5.3, the wattage is at 9, and the ampage is around 1.7. And this is with the included plug. And then note how when I changed it to my travel adapter, the voltage was at 4.9, the ampage was at 1.6, and then the wattage was around about 8. So there's definitely something funky about this plug or adapter. If that was the intended plug for the design, I'm going to say be very careful of this plug. I would replace this plug with a much better product, frankly. It may just be the off fluke that the plug that I received was not working well, but there's really just something strange about it. It's really struggling to power the unit, basically. So don't know what you think about that, but there you have it. It is what it is. Sometimes you get good products, sometimes you don't. Sometimes products have little glitches. Notice the transition there from a higher to a lower, or a lower to a higher intensity. So as I said, it goes through this cycling of high and low. And then on the right side, that's just to show you the power draw with a power bank. So again, as I said, I'm not sure the reason why it behaves so strangely with this particular plug and adapter, but my word of caution there would be to perhaps carefully look at that to make sure that if you have this kit, that it's not overheating, and if it is, consider replacing that with a better product. And so so let's keep on going. And so this is, as always, the money shot of the presentation, the temperature profile. So I got the usual setup. I've got a Z-bound pen with 2 temperature probes in the upper and the lower chamber. So without further ado, let's take a look and see how this product performs. So got quite a story to tell. Here you can see, as always, the black's the ambient, and then the purple lines are the 2 probes in the cooler. So pretty good temperature control between the upper and the lower chamber. Little bit of a wider gap than some of our products, but still certainly within very, very acceptable range. There's maybe a 2-3 there's maybe a 2 or 3 degree shift there, Fahrenheit, between the lower and the upper chamber. In terms of the product itself, so when I set the panel to 2 centigrade, which is the lowest it can go, incredibly, it actually goes all the way down to 32 Fahrenheit. So it basically reaches freezing. I have very, very rarely seen a travel cooler that can actually go all the way down to freezing, basically, so 32. But anyway, so note number one is that I think there was maybe like a 1 or 2 degree offset between the panel itself and the actual temperature read. When you go up to 4, it elegantly, goes up a few degrees. You go up to 6, it elegantly goes up again, and 8, and then 10, and so on. So very, very, very consistent and tight temperature control. Just sort of noting that there's a little bit of a mismatch between the panel setting that you set and the actual temperature that happens in the cooling chamber. But this is really, really nice and impressive. I think once you know exactly how your cooler performs, you can just mentally adjust the panel temperature to be relative to what the actual temperature is going to be. And then if you have probes inside the chamber anyway when you travel, you'll know exactly what the real temperature is. Messed around with power banks. So when you do a full power at 2 centigrade, the power bank, a 20,000 milliamp power bank, lasts about 9 hours. And then in this first round of testing, when you set it to like 4 Fahrenheit, so a little bit lesser intensity, it actually runs quite long. I had mine going for 13 hours with a 20,000 milliamp power. So very, very nice. The rest here is just me playing around with different settings, and I was kind of messing around, so I don't have too much more to report. I have another graph now that I'm going to show you, which is about the carrier bag and the mesh. Did a few more temperature tests. Did another one with 20,000 at 5C, clocked in 14 hours on battery. Did another one at 2, clocked in another 9 hours. So really, really nice from a sort of a power consumption perspective, very comparable to the other coolers. Where it got interesting was, so I played around with having the mesh on and then taking it back off, and on, taking it back off, changing temperatures, playing around with the mesh going on and off. The mesh does affect the performance of the cooler. So the data is very clear. When you have the mesh on, you lose about, I'm going to say 3 degrees centigrade of cooling power, maybe 2, maybe 3. So I had it set at 2C, and it kind of it went from 32 to 35 Fahrenheit. And then I did it again, and it went back up. And then after I took the mesh off, it kind of stabilized. I let it stabilize for a while. Also, I'm going to say the stability was a little bit messed up as well. Not 100% sure. Took it to 5C, 35. It kind of went up to sort of 36, 37, and so on. So you get the idea. So the mesh will have a slight warming effect on the performance of the cooler, which kind of makes sense based on the thermal plots that I have. So your call if that bothers you or not. I'm going to say that puts just a little bit extra stress on the cooler or the fans and other things like that. I personally would not use the mesh itself with the bag. I think I would just tuck it away like I showed you in that earlier picture, and have the vents just be nice and clear so that the air can flow from out of the vents from the fans. So just something to think about there. And I think that's really all I have. So overall, really good performance from a temperature perspective. Just watch out for the panel setting temperature, because it is a little bit off by a couple of degrees. So if you set it all the way down to 2 centigrade, be careful, because actually it will go down to 0 degrees centigrade inside the chamber. So it will literally start skirting on the freezing point. So something to think about there. So let's keep on going. So then, yeah, really just sort of wrapping this all up. So in conclusion, I'm going to give it a thumbs up for really great temperature control, really good stability of temperature control, really nice from a power battery consumption perspective. I'll give it a slight thumbs down on the accessory bag, but this one's a shame. And the reason why is the bag itself is really cool and elegant. It's just the mesh part is a little bit of a pain point. But that said, you can tuck it away, and so, maybe it's forgivable. The other thing about the bag is just notice how it only has one zip instead of two. So when you close the bag, there's only one location where you'll be able to have wires from a power bank leave, which would be on the side, and then they would be running, and it would be a little bit more messy. So for a future design recommendation, have two zippers, one on either side. So when the zippers join in the middle, you'll have a really nice location for having wires leave. Normally, the way I would handle a bag like this is I would actually just poke a hole directly through the bag itself so the wire can run. The problem is this has a really nice aluminium inner layer, and so it would be a shame to ruin that with kind of a hole and a wire. So just, yeah, there's something to think about. The display button, so the temperature display is really nice. I think the red glowing halo ring is problematic. I would have a problem with that with red eyes and hotel rooms and different things like that. I was messing around with it in the dark, and it's definitely a shame that you can't obscure it or switch that off. And so I'll give the display button panel kind of a thumbs down because of that. But the panel itself works really, really nice. It's just a shame there's this red halo thing that's on there. That said, I did get a chance to review an earlier rendition of this product, and this is a super nice improvement on the prior rendition. So really, really nice done to the engineers and the work that went into this. So let's keep on going. So this is just to recap. Watch out for the little zip here. It might be annoying for wire management. Watch out for the mesh. This will negatively affect the performance of the cooler. Really nice flask. Big watch out for this plug here. Yeah, it has to be a fault with the kit that I have. I would be amazed as if this is the same with all the stock plugs. But maybe you can send me a message about this if you have a cooler that has this accessory, to let me know if you're also noticing that it gets really hot. But beyond that, I think that's a wrap on this cooler, and just maybe some closing remarks. So as always, we have a cool club community if you're interested to hang out. Discord, Reddit, X, wherever. Direct emails, come and say hello. Love to hear from you. Of course, we have the Sir Koolzalot product testing service. So if you're a manufacturer, a design firm, you're a patient that has very specialized travel needs and different things like that, I've got lots of services that I can offer you for those different applications and needs. Reach out to me about that. And of course, I have the Cool Shop that has tried and tested inventory. Every item in my shop has been individually tested to make sure that it performs to traveler patient specifications. I don't have a large inventory. It's a curated inventory. It gets stocked maybe every 1 or 2 months. And so if you're interested, come and have a peek at that. And with that said, that's a wrap for today, and wishing you all a wonderful weekend.